Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get started with this next topic. I know you guys are having great breaks and talking with each other. This is wonderful that you guys are having such a great time talking with each other. I'm going to go ahead and get started with this next topic of the 5 precepts. This is where you're going to learn about 5 impactful decisions that can be made either wisely or unwisely. And it's either going to produce wholesome results or wholesome kamma or unwholesome results, depending on how you make these decisions. So whenever you're learning something like this from the Buddha, it's important to understand that he's teaching you about the natural law of Kamma. He doesn't teach rules or commandments. He doesn't have those kinds of things. He never guilt, shames, or fears you into doing anything. He's helping you to understand this cause and effect and action and result, helping you to be able to understand how you can make decisions either wisely or unwisely. So I'm going to be teaching you using the original words of the Buddha on these things. If you ever heard that the Buddha taught no killing, no stealing, no sexual misconduct, no lying, no intoxicants, he actually didn't teach that. That sounds like black and white, sounds like a bunch of rules or commandments. You're going to see his original words, and you're going to see he provides much more illuminating language than that kind of rules or commandments and things like that. What he's teaching you is this cause and effect or action and result, the results of your decisions. It's your life, it's your decisions, and it's your results. And anytime you make a decision, it's going to produce a certain result. And you would like to make those decisions as wisely as possible because that's what's going to produce wholesome results in your life. So the Buddha has these 5 impactful decisions that you could make either wisely or unwisely. So I'm going to take you one by one, helping you guys to understand these. So these are the words of the Buddha. He says, abandoning the taking of life, refraining from taking life, without stick or sword, diligent, compassionate, trembling for the welfare of all living beings. So whenever you're studying the teachings of the Buddha, it's important that you investigate and examine his teachings. So anytime you see something like this, you don't just accept it on face value, you actually penetrate into it and examine it. So you can see here that he's talking about living compassionately for the welfare of all living beings. So one of the first things you might ask yourself is, well, what is a living being? You're going to need to know that. And don't assume that you know what a living being is. So in the teachings of the Buddha, he teaches something called the 5 aggregates. The 5 aggregates is what helps you to understand what is a living being. You might think about these as 5 criteria or 5 elements or 5 collections. And if an individual has these 5 things, then you know that it's actually a living being. You know that you're a living being. So as I teach these 5 aggregates to you, you can kind of reflect on that and you can see that you have all 5 of these. Because this definition is held up for 2,500 years. The Buddha shares that a living being is going to have physical form, right? You can see that you have physical form. A living being is going to have feelings, right? Those pleasant feelings, painful feelings, neither painful nor pleasant. That you're going to have perceptions. Perceptions are like your views and opinions about the world. You're going to have what's called volitional formations, which are choices and decisions. And then there's going to be a consciousness, which is the mind. These are called the 5 aggregates. Form, feeling, perceptions, volitional formations, and a consciousness. And you can see every living being has those, whether it's a human being, a squirrel, a rabbit, a snake, all these beings have the 5 aggregates. And that's how you can independently verify that this is true. But then you can take something that you know is not a living being and make sure that this definition still holds up. So this chair that I'm sitting on or wherever you're sitting, ask yourself, does it have physical form? Yes, it has physical form, right? Does it have feelings? No, it doesn't have any feelings. Does it have perceptions? Does it have views and opinions about the world? No, it doesn't have that. Does it have volitional formations? Can this chair make choices and decisions? Can it pick itself up, walk down the street and put itself back down? No, can't do that. Does it have a consciousness or a mind? No, doesn't have one of those. So we can see that this definition holds up. And you're going to need to learn the 5 aggregates because anytime that you're causing harm to a living being, that harm is going to come back to you. And you're going to need to eliminate that harm. And that's why the 5 aggregates are so important. But as you're making your way towards that, there's kind of like a shorthand way to think about this. This definition isn't going to get you to enlightenment. It's the 5 aggregates that's going to do that. But this can kind of help you between now and the time that you fully cultivate wisdom about the 5 aggregates, is that a living being will typically come from an egg, a sperm, and it will have a consciousness. But there are some living beings that don't come from an egg and a sperm. They all have a consciousness, but they don't all come from an egg and a sperm. So you can kind of use this as like a shorthand way. It kind of matches for about 99.9% of all living beings. So you can potentially use that. So notice that I have up here that plants, bacteria, I could include viruses up here. These aren't living beings. And the unfortunate thing is sometimes with our lack of wisdom about the world around us, we will use language that isn't accurately reflecting what it is that we're actually doing and what we're experiencing. So we might say, I'm going to kill this bacteria, or I'm going to kill this virus, or don't kill that tree. Someone might say that, but you're not actually killing the virus. You're not actually killing the bacteria. What you're doing is eliminating it, right? Or you're not really killing that tree. What you're doing is you're harvesting the tree. So as long as your mind thinks this way, you might say those kinds of things. And you're going to need to be able to see more and more true reality and speak in ways that represents true reality. So you can see this through the five aggregates, that a tree, a virus, a bacteria, that they're not a living being. You can also see this through the natural law of Kamma, because whenever you kill a living being, it's going to produce unwholesome results. Whenever you cause harm to a living being, it's going to cause harm back. So if you eliminate a bacteria or a virus from the body, what do you experience? Because if you experience unwholesome results, then that means that that was a living being. But if you remove a bacteria or a virus from the body, you actually experience wholesome results, that this body is now more healthy. So you can see this through the five aggregates, that plants, bacteria, viruses aren't living beings, but you can also see it through the natural law of Kamma. So you're going to need to be able to see what is a living being and what isn't a living being, so that then you can look at decisions like this about euthanasia of a human or animal, termination of a pregnancy, suicide, assisted suicide, capital punishment, war, government-sponsored killings, murder. These are all intentional killings. But whether you choose to do these things or not, it's a choice for you to make. I'm not here to tell you what you should or shouldn't do in your life. I'm just here to help you see the natural law of Kamma. There's no part in the teachings of the Buddha where he's trying to convince you of anything. It's up to you to cultivate wisdom and make decisions for your own life. So I'm not here to convince you of anything at all. I'm here to just help you look at these things, and then you make decisions for yourself. Because each one of these things, I could potentially give you examples of where it might be wise to do these kinds of things, or it might be unwise in certain situations to do these kinds of things. So I'm going to take a couple of them and help you see how to do this so that you can figure this out on your own, and you don't need somebody telling you what you should or shouldn't be doing, but you can make those decisions for yourself. I'm going to start with something like termination of a pregnancy. Now, some people think that this is like a political discussion, and that isn't the way that I see this. This is a medical technology that we have available to us. Sometimes it might be wise to do this. In other cases, it could potentially be unwise. But at the end of the day, it's up to each individual to make their own choice for themselves. In fact, if someone came to me and said, hey, David, should I terminate this pregnancy? I wouldn't tell them yes or no. That's not my place, right? I would just share, if you do terminate the pregnancy, this is what you're going to experience. And if you don't terminate it, here's what you will experience. And this is up to the individual to decide for themselves what they should or shouldn't be doing. But I'm going to give you this as an example so you can see that there's potentially situations where it could be wise and situations where it could be unwise. Because the Buddha isn't teaching you to preserve all life at all cost. That's not what he's teaching you. He's teaching you to live compassionately for the welfare of all living beings. So let's just say I was a female, which obviously I'm not, and let's just say I had a womb and there was a fetus growing in this womb. And let's just say a doctor did some medical technology and shared with me like, hey, this fetus is not ever going to live a viable life outside of the womb, and it's threatening your life to continue to have it inside the womb. Well, in that situation, maybe I make the decision to terminate that pregnancy. And that could be living compassionately for the welfare of all living beings. Because whenever you're practicing things like loving kindness and compassion, you need to first have that for yourself. Loving kindness is a genuine interest in seeing all beings be well. Compassion is the concern for the misfortune of others. So if I can't practice that for this being who I am, it would be very challenging to practice it for other beings. So if you're going to live compassionately for the welfare of all living beings, that starts with this being. So in this situation, it might be wise to terminate that pregnancy. But now let's just say I'm an individual who's having lots and lots and lots of sex with lots of different people. I'm regularly getting pregnant, and I'm regularly using termination of pregnancy in order to use it like birth control. Maybe 4, 5, 6, 8 times I'm doing this. Now I'm going to start experiencing unwholesome Kamma as a result of this. because now it's going to weigh on the body. You're going to have medical challenges by having that procedure done multiple times. And now there's going to be difficulties to your own health because now I'm not living compassionately for the welfare of all living beings, where what I could have maybe done is used birth control instead, some kind of other means, not using the killing of a child in order to be able to use it as birth control. But of course, you might have situations where someone might choose to do that. And if they choose to do that, that's their choice. But you can see the difference in the natural law of Kamma here, that in one situation, you're doing it in order to preserve your own health. In the other situation, you're doing it as birth control multiple times. And that's where it starts affecting you in unwholesome ways. We can also look at things like maybe war, right? In a country can say, hey, go over there and kill those people. We would like you to go over there and kill those people. If you go kill those people, we're not going to do anything. We're not going to arrest you for murder or anything like that. But if you come back here and you murder people here on our land, then we're going to arrest you for murder, right? So this is like a government law. This is human beings trying to make a decision. And in this situation, it's not going to match to the natural law of Kamma. Because while a human being or a government could say, go over there and kill those people, and we're not going to do anything to you, you can't escape the natural law of Kamma. The natural law of Kamma is functioning at a much higher level, and you will be affected by those decisions to go off into war and kill. Whether you choose to do that or not, again, is up to you, but you can see the natural law of Kamma that when you go away to war, you're more likely to be killed yourself. You can be experiencing a significant injury either to your brain or to your body. You can have amputations. Oftentimes, those individuals come back from war and they're addicted to drugs and alcohol and substances. Sometimes they commit suicide. They have difficulties integrating into society and kind of living a normal life again. This is all the results of their decisions based on the natural law of Kamma to go off into war and kill. And again, whether someone chooses to do that or not is up to them. But you can see how the natural law of Kamma is functioning, that a government could tell you to go do something, but that's just the human law, right? That they're not going to arrest you for murder. But the natural law of Kamma, you can't escape that. So these are all intentional killings. Some other things we'll talk about here is, let's just say your home is infested by termites, right? And now you need to figure out a way to take care of this, because obviously if you let these termites continue to eat your home, that's not living compassionately for the welfare of all living beings, because now the people who live in that home, they're not going to have a home. So the people who live there, they're not going to have a shelter, right? So if you just let these termites eat your home, this wouldn't be wise. So living compassionately for the welfare of all living beings in that situation might be that you do some research on the internet and see if there's a way to eradicate these beings without killing them. And now when you do some research on the internet, maybe you come back with the understanding that no, there isn't a way to do that. And this is a situation that me and my wife had. We had termites that were eating our home. And she ended up calling somebody, and they came and they exterminated the termites, right? And it took a couple of years for them to be able to do that, because they had to put food around, and these beings ate the food, and then they took it back to their nest, and it eliminated the nest, right? Well, if we would have let those beings continue to eat our home, that wouldn't have been living compassionately for the welfare of all living beings. But by doing some research first and trying to figure out a way that we could get rid of them without killing them, that was the compassion, the concern for their misfortune. But because these beings were causing harm, because of the natural law of Kamma, harm came to them. Where human beings, if we ate wood, we have a level of consciousness that we know to go outside in the forest and eat trees that isn't going to harm anybody. But these insects, they don't have the same level of consciousness as a human being, so they don't understand the difference between eating wood in the forest versus eating this particular home. So they were eating the home, and now because of causing harm, harm came to them. So the Buddha isn't teaching you to preserve all life at all costs. He's teaching you to live compassionately for the welfare of all living beings. And in that situation, there's compassion there, that we have concern for their misfortune. We're trying to figure out a way that we don't have to kill them. But ultimately, at the end of the day, we needed to hire somebody to come take care of that kind of thing. So you might encounter these kinds of situations in your day-to-day life, and you're going to need to figure out how to actually practice. And if you have challenges, you can always reach out to a teacher, and we're here to help you to be able to figure out how to make decisions. But we won't make decisions for you. We will just say, okay, if you choose to do it this way, this is what you'll experience. If you choose to do it that way, this is what you'll experience. And then it's up to you to decide for yourself. Sometimes people have things like a DNR. I don't know if you guys know what that is, a do not resuscitate order. They have that here in the USA and other countries where you can sign a legal document that says, if this being dies, don't use medical technology to bring me back to life. If you have one of those or you choose to do one of those, sometimes people ask me, is that still practicing this precept? Am I still living compassionately for the welfare of all living beings? And the answer is yes, because you haven't actually killed anybody in that situation. You haven't killed a living being. What you're saying is, I'm comfortable with death. And if death comes to this being, don't use medical technology to bring me back to life. So if someone chooses to do that, you are still practicing this precept. Then sometimes people ask me about defense and protection. They think like, if I'm in my bed, sleeping at night and it's 2 or 3 a.m. and somebody's breaking into my house, what should I do? And what I share with them is I say, that person who's breaking in at 3 a.m. isn't bringing you chocolate and flowers, right? That's for sure. They're there to do harm, right? But the teachings of the Buddha aren't about this plug and play. It's not about if this happens, do that. And if this happens, do that. You can't have a permanent decision like that. Moving to a higher consciousness means that you use your wisdom to make an important decision and a wise decision in any particular situation. So, what I usually suggest to people is that if this is occurring to you, that if you can get out of the house, just get out of the house, right? If that person wants to break something, if they would like to steal something, so be it. Get to the point where you're safe, call the police. They're the ones who have the skills, the training, and the tools to be able to handle that. Just get out of the house. But remember, you can't have permanence because you're not always going to be able to get out of the house. What if you look outside and there's a massive fire outside and you can't get out there? Or maybe you look outside and there's a gang of people outside your home. It wouldn't necessarily be wise to leave out of the home. So that's where each situation is unique, and you need to keep your mind calm and composed and make a wise decision in each situation. So if somebody had you backed up against the corner and the wall, maybe in your house or in your home, and you need to defend this being and harm comes to that other person, that's the harm that's coming to them because they're choosing to do harm. You didn't go out on the street looking to cause harm, intending to do harm. You're just hanging out in your bed at 2 or 3 a.m. in the morning, and now this harm is coming to you. And if you use defense or protection to be able to stop that from coming to you, that is having compassion for all living beings. So to stand there and just let somebody beat you up or stab you with a knife or harm you, that's not living compassionately. So if you decide to defend this being who you are, then do that. And what I would suggest you do is you cause as least amount of harm as possible, right? If they have a stick, get a bigger stick, right? If they have a knife, maybe you need to get something bigger or something like that. So you're going to need to make decisions in the present moment in each one of those situations. But if you can cause the least amount of harm as possible and stop this attack from happening, that's usually best. Then sometimes people ask me questions about consuming animal products and being vegan. If you choose to do this at some point in your life, it's a choice for you to make. But if you do choose to do this, you're going to see improvement to the health of the body and the mind. Because when you're eating animal flesh, you're not just eating the flesh itself, you're eating certain drugs and hormones and toxins as well. And this is affecting the health of the body and the health of the mind as well. They've taken wild salmon out of places like Washington State where there were really clean rivers, and they've tested the flesh of the animal, and they found like 90 different substances in the animal that weren't supposed to be there. Things like antidepressants and cocaine and things like this, because human beings have been flushing that down in the toilet, and now it's gotten into the water table and it's polluting our water, and the fish are absorbing that. So farmers are putting antibiotics and growth hormones and things like this into their animals. And now when you're ingesting the animal flesh, you're actually ingesting that stuff. So the teachings of the Buddha are independently verifiable. Remember, you don't believe any of these things. If you ever choose to move to a plant-based food supply, you'll be able to see that the health of the body and the mind improves. But whether you choose to do that or if you choose to do that is totally up to you. I'm just helping you to be able to see the natural law of Kamma, and then it's up to you to decide whether this is something that you would like to do at some point or not. And whether you do that now or later, totally up to you. It's your independent practice. I'm not here to tell you what you should or shouldn't do, but it's up to you to decide because you will see a significant improvement in moving to a plant-based food supply. So do you guys have any questions on this first one? Yeah, Randy, we have some mics here.
Thank you for this. So my my question is, for example, I still consume animal products. Will that prevent me from reaching enlightenment in this life?
Not necessarily. So at one time, human beings were all plant-based eaters. The scientists tell us this, researchers tell us this. We don't have to believe them, though. We can see the truth for ourselves because we can look at our teeth and we can see that our teeth are very similar to a horse or a cow because our animals that eat meat, they tend to have sharp, ripping teeth, and they eat meat and they need to rip up the animal flesh to be able to eat it. So at one time, we were all plant-based eaters. But our population became so overgrown that we outgrew the use of plants and vegetables in the forest. So we started being scavengers and we started taking over hunts. Like we saw animals kill and we would get together, we would scare them away, and then we would take their hunt and their kill. And then that wasn't enough meat for us. So then we started doing organized hunting for ourselves. And now we started organizing as human beings and hunting and eating that animal flesh. Then that wasn't enough for us. So then we started doing manufactured farming. And we've been doing this for many, many generations of eating animal flesh. Um, but now more and more people are starting to understand that it's unwise to continue to do that. And they're starting to move to plant based food supplies. But whether we do that or not, or if we do it, it's our choice. But because we've been on this animal meat for so long, the body itself, isn't able to move to a plant based food supply. So you might decide at some point to try to move to a plant based food supply, do that for a period of time, and then determine whether or not that's working for you or not based on the health of the body. Because if you ate plant based food and your health was deteriorating and this being is not going to be healthy, that wouldn't be living compassionately for the welfare of all living beings. So, for example, I switched to plant based food in 2018. And as I did that, ultimately my B12 dropped significantly. And I was also donating blood at the time. And I started using supplements, and supplements were working for a little while. But then I got to a point where, 4, 5, 6 years into it, my B12 was still very low and I was having all these symptoms. So I started to have to eat eggs and a little bit of milk and things like this. I was eating ice cream with my son, and this helped me to build up my B12. So by and large, I don't eat any animal products, but every once in a while, I need a little bit of eggs, I need a little bit of milk in order to get the B12 in there. But I've tried to go this period of time without these animal products, but it just wasn't possible to sustain the health of this body. And I wouldn't be living compassionately if I just continued to allow this body to experience those symptoms. So, what I would suggest, if you're interested, to do is to try to move to a plant based food supply if you're interested in doing that. See how that goes for you. You might need to take supplements and things like this. But then ultimately, you might find that the body needs these things in order to survive. When we get 3, 4, 5 generations into people eating plants again, we'll be able to adapt, and human beings will be able to eat plant based food supply. I have a student who she's been vegan ever since she was in the womb of her mom's stomach, uh, that she's never had a piece of meat ever in her life. And she doesn't have to take any supplements, she doesn't have to do anything, that she can eat plant based food. But for some of us, since we've been on meat for a period of time, and so were our ancestors, we're not going to be able to easily move to a plant based food supply. But in this situation, when I eat eggs or when I ingest ice cream, it's not out of sensual desire because I went, 5, 6 years without eating any of that stuff. So I know that my mind doesn't have a longing, yearning for it. I'm not doing it based on trying to please the tongue. So that's what you would ultimately like to be able to do, is figure out what's going on there in the mind, because as long as you have that longing, yearning, and craving, then you don't necessarily know if you're eating this meat or eating these other animal products based on sensual desire or not. So if you go an extended period of time without it, then you can be sure that it's not sensual desire, but this body just needs it, and now I will eat it. So I describe what I do as a vegetarian. It's like as vegan as possible in any situation, but every once in a while I need to have some eggs and maybe even something else, but I won't eat meat. I won't eat flesh. But even here in the US, I typically find that when I travel, I need to eat a couple of eggs here and there because it's sometimes challenging to get food otherwise. But when I'm back in Thailand, I'm pretty much all vegan. But there's even times where I need to eat a little bit of eggs there. So it's not like everybody has to switch to vegan or else you won't get to enlightenment. It's not that. It's about learning how to live compassionately for the welfare of these other beings and understanding that they are equal to us. Where for a long time, we think that animals are subservient to us, maybe. Um, the way that I help people see this is a couple of things. Is if there was some being that was more supreme and more powerful than us on this earth, and they put us in cages and they were like harvesting things off of our body in order to eat, we wouldn't stand for it. We would all revolt. We would figure out a way to do that. But yet we're willing to do that to this other being. So I know you're a dog owner. You probably love your dog quite a lot. So we have a certain amount of love and respect for animals, but when we're eating them, there's a certain amount of ill will there or craving even that we have. Another thing that the Buddha taught that can help you kind of lean in this direction is he taught that anytime you encounter a living being, that because we've all been reborn so many different times, that at some point of time, we've all been relatives at some point. So when that mosquito lands on you and you smash it, it's kind of like, well, there goes grandma, right? So you're not interested in doing that. So what we do is we kind of blow them off of us, or we kind of swoop them off of us, because it's like if you think about every being around you as having previously been your mother, father, brother, sister, son, daughter, or some other relative, you start being interested to live more loving and kind and compassionate for the people around you, rather than just eating animals or killing bugs and stuff like this, which we've kind of got adjusted to as part of our upbringing. But when we start thinking in a different way, then we start making different decisions. And you'll see that it'll impact your mind. And not only will be more loving and kind to that mosquito, but you'll be more loving and kind to the people around you too.
Yeah. Thank you for that. So, as a follow up to one of the points that you made, would it be using right view to say, okay, if I'm going to go vegetarian, not vegan, but vegetarian, but don't go to factory eggs, like do pasture eggs, or go to a local farm?
Mhm.
Is that moving toward a right view?
Yeah, that's what you would like to do, is gradually move in these directions. Like I didn't just snap my fingers and go vegan. I went to eggs and cheese and milk. Actually, no, milk, egg and cheese for like 6 months. It took me 2 weeks to get off meat because I was really interested to get off that really quick. And then I spent about 6 months of still eating eggs and cheese before I then the body and the mind was adjusted enough that I went to plant-based food, because you need to find new recipes, you need to find new suppliers, you need to find these things, and you can't do it quickly. You need to gradually move towards these things. So that's the way you would like to do it, is gradually moving towards these things, and rather than doing it abruptly.
All right, thank you.
Yep.
Um, I have a question in terms of the medical setting. If you were to give morphine to somebody who's dying, or requests morphine for yourself if you're in a lot of pain as you are dying, is that is that frowned upon in terms of, because morphine causes loss of consciousness or ability to think, and you know, are should you suffer during that time of death?
You can take medication in order to have less pain. There's no harm in that. You haven't caused any harm to any being. So there's no harm in taking medications to be able to lessen the pain. That would be in line with living compassionately for the welfare of all living beings.
But I guess the substance also causes some altered consciousness.
Mhm. As you're easing into death, you know, if you were able to get to enlightenment prior to death, you're not going to experience significant pain. An enlightened being experiences pain differently than an unenlightened being, because an unenlightened being, they experience the physical pain, but they also experience mental anguish along with it, because their mind is craving permanent comfort of the body. So that mental anguish heightens the physical pain, where an enlightened being, if they experience physical pain, they don't experience the mental anguish. So the physical pain is very muted in the mind of an enlightened being. So if someone's gotten to enlightenment prior to
They
death,
wouldn't need it.
they wouldn't really need it, or if they did need it, it would be very minimal. Like they may need it. Like when I was just in the motorbike accident, I took ibuprofen for a period of time. Um, but it's not the purpose behind it, the intention behind it is not to produce heedlessness. So you need to have intention behind any particular decision. So if your intention is to promote heedlessness, then this would be unwise. But if your intention is to lessen the pain, which an unenlightened being is going to need, because if you're experiencing significant pain going into death, this can be problematic as you're experiencing now rebirth. So if someone chooses to take those kinds of things, the intention behind it is to lessen the pain, not to produce heedlessness.
Thank you. And then another question is, there are some stories of Buddha's past lives, and one of them is like a mother tiger and her cub are starving in the forest, and the Buddha is there as a human, and he sacrifices himself for the sake of the mother and the cubs. So he endangers his life so that they could survive, and it's self-sacrificial. This is in his unenlightened state of minds in his previous lives, and that somehow thrusts him into this level of Buddhahood, and is when he becomes a Buddha. And there's a lot of stories kind of analogous to that in like previous texts, and I just wanted to ask about what your thoughts on that are, because that seems contrary to these laws.
Yeah, that's not true. You won't see that in his original teachings. Sometimes people come up with these stories along the way since it's been 2,500 years from his death. But if you look in his original teachings in the Pali Canon, you won't find that story. That's something that somebody else came up with their own.
Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm. Yes, ma'am.
So when it comes to consuming animal products, where I am at my life right now, I am unable to support my own self, because I don't have a job, so I don't have any form of money for myself yet, and so I rely heavily on what food products my family use to make food, and um, the most of the people in the house I live with, they don't practice these teachings, so they use a lot of meat in foods, and also a lot of dairy products too. So my question is, since right now I'm not able to make my own choice with money to purchase my own sort of food, would it be wise now to focus more on making the choice for myself to choose not to eat the meat that they make in foods, and to sort of find my own food within the house that's already there, instead of just because I am interested in gradually deciding not to eat meat, and it's harder to do that a little bit right now in the point of my life with dairy products, since the area I live in, there's like all the restaurants, they don't really support a lot of vegan options, so it's a bit more difficult to, yeah, at the moment in my life right now, it's more difficult to make my own personal decisions of moving towards vegan only.
Yeah, this is where you can understand that your practice is developing, right? It's not like hurry up and get to these things today, but instead, it sounds like you have compassion in your mind for these living beings, but out of where you are in your current life, this is what you're doing. What I would encourage you to do is focus on getting independent financially, because an enlightened being is going to be independent financially. They're not going to be dependent on other people, because that is going to form attachment where now you're attached to this person. And if they die or they move away or they end the relationship, you can't survive and sustain your life. So you'd like to get up on your own 2 feet financially, and that's going to then help you to be able to make some of these other decisions. But if this is where you are in your life right now, that's where you are. And that's where you can see it's a gradual training, gradual practice, and gradual progress. You don't have to put pressure on yourself to do certain things at any given time, but you're gradually moving in the direction of more and more wise decisions. Because the impact that you're having here by consuming animal products is there's going to be more sickness in the body. There's going to be effect to the mind. There's certain environmental things that are affected. And those things are going to be there. And now you just gradually improve those as you age.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi, this is coming from a place of curiosity. I know that humans used so that our ancestors were vegetarian. But I mean, so the past like 2.6 million years, humans have been omnivorous. It's like 3 million years ago, the Australopithecus were the ones that were vegetarian. So, I mean, this is the reason that we have incisors or canines, sorry, so that we can like tear meat. So I'm like, I'm confused what you mean by like going back to vegetarianism when evolutionarily we are absolutely omnivorous. So this is where I'm having this like disconnect.
Yeah, so what I'm sharing is that in the past, when we first were originated, we were plant-based eaters, and now we've over time moved to eating meat. But now we can see the unwise decisions in that because it's causing harm to our body, it's causing harm to our mind, it's causing harm to our environment. And now, if people would like, they can choose on their own to move to plant based food. And that's going to then improve the health of our body, our mind, and then our environment. But whether people choose to do that or not, it's an individual choice for each person.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I'm also wondering, like, okay, so for example, when I grew up, it was kind of rural, and we raised our own meat. And I guess my dad always taught me the most respect you could have for your meat is knowing that you raised it and it died in a very humane way. So doing something like that, where it's very local, it's very small, it's not these like terribly climate changing huge farms elsewhere, is something like that still along this path?
I wouldn't do that at this point in my life. I wouldn't kill another living being in order to sustain the health of this body because I know that I can do that without those things. But oftentimes the mind's going to try to find ways to hold on to these things. And we form certain perceptions as we go through our life. Our mind is what we call it's conditioned to think a certain way and have certain perspective about the world around us. Getting to enlightenment isn't to hold on to what we currently think about the world, is to be able to see this other side that by eating meat, it does cause harm to our body, to our mind. It does cause harm to other beings. And if we would like to get to the point where we have love and kindness and compassion for all beings, and we treat all beings equally, and we love all beings equally, that even raising an animal and then choosing to kill it for our own meat, this is unwise. It comes from our craving. There's a certain amount of ill will there, and this is where our ignorance is there. But we can arise wisdom and see that there's a better way to live life. Even though we might have done these things in the past, we can change what we're doing. And it just requires a change of our perspective and how we look at these things. Even though we've grown up and thought in a certain way up to this point, we can change that perspective. And what I teach you here, there's going to be things like we were talking the other day, it's going to conflict with the way that you currently think. And that's helpful for you to be able to see that what you're currently doing isn't working. And that's where what the Buddha teaches you is that when your mind gets to the point where it's completely peaceful, completely joyful, that's where you've reached what's called final knowledge, where you fully understand the path to enlightenment. And that's the indication for you that you fully cultivated the wisdom and your mind has now been liberated or free from those discontent feelings. That as long as you experience, frustration, sadness, annoyment, disappointment, embarrassment, shyness, all these other things, you know that your mind is not currently functioning in a way that it is enlightened. And that's the indication for you that there's still a lack of wisdom there. So the mind needs to be willing to let go of these false perceptions, these misperceptions that it's holding on to be able to see this other way of life. And now, once you do and you start practicing that, you'll see the improvement to the condition of your mind, in your life, in your relationships. But things that you're going to learn are going to conflict with what you're currently thinking and the way you've been brought up. But you need to be able to peer into it and see about how can I practice loving kindness, meaning a genuine interest in seeing all beings be well, as long as I'm killing this animal and choosing to eat it. And even though we've done that in the past, we can see that that's unwise. Because I grew up on a farm, or not grew up, but I used to work on a farm, and we used to kill a lot of sheep and goats and things like this. And looking back on that, I experienced a lot of unwholesome karma because of that. And then once I got away from that, that's what helped me to get to the point where I don't experience that anymore. But the mind's always going to be looking for a way to hold on to what it currently thinks. But you just need to be able to peer into it and choose to let that go and see this other better way of life. And what's waiting for you there is the peace and the joy, the liberated mind.
I think, thank you. That's great. I was thinking about it in like a biological, like, oh, that's a good source of protein, but I understand more what you mean, that it's more about still are inflicting harm.
Mm-hmm. And there's ways to get protein other
Absolutely.
than meat, right? Because even broccoli has protein in it. This is one of the things that we've been taught, and our mind's been conditioned to sometimes think that only meat has protein. And some people think that way, but they've there's all kinds of things we could talk about here. There's like different studies, and I know you're a scientist, so you would really probably like to hear those kinds of things. But there's all kinds of studies to show that when there's a population of people eating plant-based food, that they actually are healthy with less disease versus when they're actually eating meat. And this is the unwholesome gamma. Even you can look at COVID. Like the reason why we experience COVID is because of being involved with animals. Like it's not just COVID, it's HIV, it's bird flu, swine flu, mad cow disease. All of these illnesses are coming from our interaction with the animal realm. And while we have vaccines and some people appreciate having a vaccine, that doesn't actually solve the problem. The underlying source and the root of the problem is that we keep interacting with these animals and choosing to eat them. And now the viruses can jump from the animal realm into the human realm. And the next COVID is waiting right around the corner for us. It's just a matter of time before that happens. So if we clean up our decision making, that's what's going to ultimately help us to get to the point where we don't have these diseases coming into the human realm. Hmm.
I had a question on people who live in extreme climates, right? Like living in like Arctic Circle, like Arctic Circle, or like I saw a documentary once where in the Sahara Desert, the only source of or most of the source of food was like cows, so they would even like eat the anus of the cow because they didn't want to leave anything. So that was like so the food is so scarce.
Hmm.
So what would you suggest for people who are living these extreme climates and for large parts of the year they don't have access to plant based food that they cannot eat.
I would share with them that it's unwise to live in those places. That if they can't attain, food in a way that doesn't cause harm to others, it would be unwise to live in those environments. Sometimes we're holding on to the land because of our ancestors or our heritage, or even we see things like people living on the coastline, and now they're getting hurricane after hurricane after hurricane. This is holding on and clinging to maybe the wealth of that property or the view or being known for having this beautiful house that's right on the coast, but we keep experiencing that unwholesome result of things like a hurricane or killing animals in order to survive. There's enough space on this earth that we don't have to live in those areas, but people are choosing to do that. And as long as they're clinging to that, then they're going to continue to make those decisions to eat animals and eat things that otherwise, if they were in another environment, they could eat different food and they'll experience improved health in their body.
Thank you.
Yep. Okay, so let's go to the next one. This is the second precept, which the Buddha says abandoning the taking of what is not given, living purely, accepting what is given, awaiting what is given without stealing. So there's multiple things that he's talking about here. Of course, the underlying theme here is it would be unwise to steal, right? If we steal, this is essentially coming from our craving, desire, attachment. Remember, the Buddha's guiding you to eliminate craving, desire, attachment in all of his teachings because that's what's causing the discontentedness. So, in killing, the one that we were just talking about, there's a certain craving there that the mind has to kill another being, whether it's for food or for any other thing. There's a certain longing, a yearning that the mind wants that. There's a certain amount of anger, there's a certain amount of or ill will, but there's a certain amount of ignorance involved. So, here is the same thing. If we're stealing from somebody, there's a certain craving that the mind wants this thing and it's not willing to do the work. So it's craving and clinging and it's holding on and it's trying to get this product from this other person. When in reality, we could just work and acquire that for ourselves. So there's a certain amount of craving and ill will and ignorance involved in stealing. So we need to be sure that we're not stealing because if we steal, we're causing harm to this individual and now harm can come back to us. Then it's helpful to ensure that we're not assuming that something can be used or taken. Like, let's just say I was a college student and I was turning in my term paper to a college professor, and I saw the stapler on their desk and they're out of the room. And I just grab the stapler and start stapling my paper. And now the professor walks in and is like, "Hey, what are you doing? That's my stapler," right? Maybe they're attached to their stapler. They're not willing to share it. And now they get angry, they get frustrated, not realizing that they're causing their own anger, their own frustration. They attribute that to me, that I'm the one who's causing their anger, and now maybe they give me an F on my paper, or maybe they fail me for the whole class. And this is my unwholesome results of having assumed that something could be used or taken. When in reality, I could have just waited for the professor to come back, say, hey, excuse me, ma'am, excuse me, sir, can I use your stapler? And they're either going to say yes or no. And if they say no, then I just go find one somewhere else. No big deal. But when you start using things without people's knowledge, this is where you can run into problems for yourself. But remember, the teachings of the Buddha, they're not black and white. You need to move to a higher consciousness here and make wise decisions in any given situation. If I was outside and I saw that my neighbor has a laceration on their arm from doing some yard work and they're bleeding and they're going to bleed out and actually die, and I see my other neighbor has a piece of fabric on their front porch and I can grab that fabric and put on a tourniquet, well, I'm going to put on that tourniquet, right? I'm not going to knock on the door and wait and wait and wait and while the person's bleeding out, right? I'm going to like get the fabric, go put on the tourniquet. And now when they're in the ambulance and they're gone and they're safe, I'm going to go back to that neighbor. Excuse me, sir. Excuse me, ma'am. I used this fabric on your patio. I'm so sorry. I would like to reimburse you for this, or I'd like to find this fabric somewhere else and buy one from you for you. You know, what can I do here? Right? So the Buddha's not telling you what to always do in every situation because that would be permanence. You need to use your higher consciousness and figure out what would be wise in any given situation. The same thing with accepting what is given. When people are practicing generosity with you, the Buddha teaches you to accept it because that's enhancing the quality of their mind. If you shut that down, it doesn't allow them to practice generosity and train their mind to let go. So if grandma is going to give you a sweater at Christmas and you look at it and you're like, I'm never going to wear that sweater ever, the Buddha teaches you to accept it, right? And now when you accept it, you can actually give it to somebody else. Now, some people, particularly here in America, they call that regifting, and that's a bad thing. Well, the other option would be to put it in your closet and let it sit there for 20 or 30 years and it goes to waste. That's not wise. So if you accept grandma's sweater and you give it to somebody else and grandma gets angry, well, grandma wasn't practicing pure generosity. She had an expectation and she's the one who's causing her anger. You didn't cause her anger. So maybe now this sweater goes through 5, 6, 10 different hands and somebody finally looks at this sweater and says, that's the most beautiful sweater I have ever seen. I'm going to wear that sweater every day of my life, right? And now it ended up there's 10 different people that practice generosity in that line, right? Whereas if you shut down somebody's generosity, over time, people aren't going to practice generosity with you. But remember, it's not black and white. If someone offers you crystal methamphetamine or heroin, are you going to accept what is given? Probably not, right? You're going to be like, no, I'm good. You know, I don't need that, right? So you need to be able to practice with your wisdom here. The Buddha teaches awaiting what is given. Awaiting what is given is that you don't load somebody up with a bunch of expectations when they're going on a trip to be able to get you something. Like say you have a business partner or like a life partner, somebody like this who's going on a trip and they're like, you load them up with a bunch of expectations of what you want them to get you. Now they're feverishly going around trying to find what it is that you want. And when they come back and they don't have what you want, you're angry and you're frustrated. This is unwise. If somebody would like to give you something, just let them give it to you. Await what is given. Don't load them up with a bunch of expectations. But there's some situations where people might ask you, like when I'm in Chiang Mai, sometimes students are coming back here to the US and then they're coming back to Chiang Mai and they say, hey, David, I'm going to the US. Is there anything that I can bring you? Is there something you would like? Right? And in this situation, you might decide to say, hey, yeah, can you bring me this or bring me that? In this situation, that person is practicing generosity. So now if you accept their generosity, you're still practicing this precept. So any questions on this one?
Yeah, I had a question. So sometimes when you're accepting what is given without in your mind, and maybe that's okay, is in your mind like somebody is giving you being generous to you, and you accept it. In their mind, it seems like sometimes they think, oh, this guy is too easy to like take anything you give to them, right?
Mm-hmm.
Even though that's not the intent, you're just accepting the generosity like automatically. You're not thinking that you're not thinking what they are thinking, anything like that. But they form this thing that, oh, this guy is just, you whatever you give them, he just takes it very easily and he's selfish, or things like that.
That's their perception. You can't decide for other people how they're going to perceive you. So if they're practicing generosity and you accept it, you're just accepting it. They're the one who's choosing to offer it to you. You're not being greedy or anything like that. You're just choosing to accept it. and then you may or may not even use it for yourself. You might give it to somebody else. So it's not our job to figure out for somebody else whether they should give you this gift or not. It's each individual person that needs to practice generosity from the middle way. So if somebody's giving and giving and giving and giving, that's a choice that they're making. Now, what the Buddha teaches us as terms of teachers, and we've had this conversation, is not to milk dry, right? So if a student is giving me a gift or they're regularly giving me gifts, then I need to be aware of my students, because my students might not be in the middle and practicing generosity from the middle. And maybe somebody's overextending themselves and giving too much donations. And that's where I need to kind of step in and say, hey, are you okay? Like, I've done this multiple times, even with you. I've said, the Buddha teaches us not to milk dry, but I think you have a lot of milk. Right? And I don't know. I asked them, I said, it seems like you have a lot of milk, and I'm not interested in milk drying here because you seem to be very generous with me, right? So we need to be aware of that as teachers to make sure that we're not milk drying our students. But in terms of like a friendship, if somebody's constantly giving you gifts and they overextend themselves, that's a decision that they're making, and it's on them because they're now not practicing generosity in the middle way. But if you know that they're overextending themselves, that might be where you might say, because this isn't black and white, you might say, hey, I appreciate all the gifts that you've given me, but in this situation, I'm just going to, maybe not accept this particular gift.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Any other questions on this one? Okay. So let's go to the next one. This is about sexual misconduct, and I'll read it to you, and then we'll kind of talk about a lot of different things. So the Buddha says, abandoning unchastity, abandoning sexual relations with women, men who are protected by their mother, father, and father, brother, sister, or relatives, who are protected by teachings, who have a husband, wife, or partner, whose violation entails a penalty, or even with one who has been garlanded by a man, woman, or partner as a sign of engagement. So there's multiple things that the Buddha is talking about here, because you can cause harm through your sexual activity. And if you cause harm, this harm is going to come back to you. So here where he's talking about ensuring that you're not having sex with someone who's protected by their family, essentially, that's like sex with minors. If we had sex with an 8-year-old or a 12-year-old, this is going to cause harm because the family's trying to teach that child, and now we're luring that child away, and this will impact the child, that will impact the family. And in a lot of situations, the human laws match, right? Like here in the US, if you have sex with someone under 18, this is against the law and human laws. But it's not like that everywhere. There's some countries in the world that it's not illegal to have sex with an 8-year-old child. But if you look at those places, they're actually struggling politically, socially, economically. You can see that their society is really struggling, and that's because of this. The Buddha is showing you the natural law of Kamma, that it's unwise to do that. And in countries where they're doing that regularly, you can see that their society is really struggling. So that's why the Buddha is teaching us this. Where the Buddha says, whose violation entails a penalty, that's having sex without consent. If we were to forcibly have sex with someone, like raping them, this is going to cause harm. We can get injured, we can get beat up, we can get arrested, we can have all these different kind of things happen to us. Where the Buddha talks about abandoning unchastity, this is having sex with multiple partners. If you know what chastity is like in old times, in ancient times, fathers would put metal underwear on their daughters. They had a lock-in key, and it was only the father that had the key. And I can't imagine walking around with metal underwear, but apparently they did that when they were in ancient times. That's called a chastity belt, right? Where they're not having sex with anybody. So unchastity would be just the opposite, having sex with lots of different people. So if you're doing that, that's where we get sexually transmitted diseases. That's the unwholesome kamma that we experience. You can also experience getting beat up and even murdered. People have been murdered over this kind of stuff, right? This is where you can get your material property destroyed because people get attached. And now, even though somebody said, hey, you can go have sex with other people, oftentimes there's attachment in there. And now there's this anger and hostility between the relationship and the individuals. And now there's difficulties and struggles in the relationship. So that's why the Buddha is guiding you and helping you to see that aspect of the natural law of Kamma. In some cultures, it's common to meet a partner, talk to your parents, have that person move in with you, and you get approval from your parents to be able to do that. In this situation, it's not what the Buddha is talking about here with abandoning sexual relations with people who are protected by their family. So in this situation, the family has accepted the relationship that you guys are moving in together with the parents, perhaps. So if this is going on or you ever do this, this is still practicing this particular precept. Here, where it says who were protected by teachings, this is where someone might have decided to remain celibate in order to make their way to enlightenment. You can actually get to the second stage of enlightenment while still having a sexual relationship. But if you're interested in getting to the third or fourth stage of enlightenment, where the mind's actually enlightened, you would end up giving up sexual activity. And the reason why is because as long as you have a craving for sex, the mind's going to be agitated and frustrated to a certain degree. That when you're having sex, you have all this pleasure, you feel all this pleasure, but when you're not having it, you'll be agitated and frustrated and annoyed. Whether you choose to do that or not, again, is your choice. You can make your way all the way up to the second stage of enlightenment, doing all the other work on the path to enlightenment, and just kind of hanging out there for whatever amount of time it is that you choose to have sex, because you're not going to be on your deathbed having sex, even though it's a pretty great thing, and most people think that, yeah, that's what's going to happen. You're not going to be on your deathbed having sex. There's very few people that are doing that, right? So you're going to let go of sex at some point. And as you're making your way closer and closer to enlightenment, you're going to start appreciating that peace and joy in the mind that much more than the sex. Because the sex, you experience pleasure for a couple of hours or a couple of days, perhaps, if you have that after sex glow, but then it ultimately fades away and you're agitated, annoyed, and frustrated. By the time you get to enlightenment, it's a permanent mental state that you're experiencing all throughout your day. So there's actually something better in the world than sex. I know that might be hard to believe, but there is. It's called enlightenment. And as you make your way to it, you might get to the point where you decide to let go of sexual activity. But whether you choose to do that or not is up to you. So there's certain people in the world that have chosen to no longer have sex. And if you were to try to lure that person away from that celibacy, it's causing harm to that person, and it's causing harm to the community at large. Because the very best thing that could ever happen for somebody is to get to enlightenment. And if that individual got to enlightenment, they're no longer experiencing the painful feelings, the discontentedness, all the difficulties and struggles of life. So if we lure that person away, it's causing harm for that individual. And then also somebody getting to enlightenment in a community, if they choose, they could then share that wisdom that it took for them to get to enlightenment with other people. So it's causing harm to the community at large. So in Thailand, they make this really easy for you that if there's people who are choosing to be celibate, like ordained practitioners, they will usually wear orange robes, they will shave their hair, so people know that they're not having sex with anybody. Also in Thailand, if somebody wears white every single day and typically they're shaving their hair, they're not choosing to have sex either. I no longer have sex, but I don't wear white because I'm trying to advertise to people that I don't have sex. That's not something I need to do. If somebody was ever interested in that, I wouldn't be interested in that. But some people in Thailand, they wear white in order to make sure people know that they're not choosing to have sex. And then if you're interested in having sex, you would find somebody who's not wearing these types of clothing. So Thailand makes it really easy for you to do that. Then in terms of sex with people who are already in committed relationships or people outside of any relationship that you're committed to, this would cause harm as well because you're now practicing unchastity. So you would like to make sure anybody you're choosing to have sex with isn't in any other relationships. And if you're in a current relationship, you're not interested in going outside of that relationship. Because again, that's where you get sexually transmitted diseases. That's where you can get beat up and murdered. That's where your material possessions can be destroyed. You can lose your reputation in the community and in your professional career. These are all unwholesome results of your unwise decisions. And then in terms of people that are human trafficked, this is like people who are being forced to have sex against their will. If you were to have sex with those people, you're entering into that type of environment where you can get beat up, murdered, you can get robbed, you can have all these kinds of things. Because people that are in that kind of environment, they're not the most wholesome people in the world. So if you went into that environment, you could experience difficulties and struggles. In terms of paid sexual services, even if somebody's doing it on their own and they actually have made the decision to do that, that's also unchastity. And that's where you get sexually transmitted diseases in those environments. That's where, again, you can get beat up, you can get murdered, You can get robbed when you go into some of these places, like a brothel or something like that. Notice the Buddha doesn't talk about same gender relationships here. And this is really important to be able to see, because if you have two loyal, loving, consenting adults that are choosing to have sex with each other, are they causing harm to anybody? No, they're not choosing to have cause harm to anybody. So there's never been a time in history where all men had sex with women and all women had sex with men. It just hasn't happened. That would be the permanence. And we understand the universal truth of impermanence. So two loyal, loving, consenting adults choosing to have sex with each other, it doesn't matter what gender they aren't causing any harm. And if we understand the universal truth of impermanence, we can see that there isn't ever a time where everybody has had sex with the opposite gender. It's just never happened. So the Buddha understood this, and he was aware of same gender relationships because they were happening during his lifetime too. You can pretty much see it in his teachings when he's talking about it, but he doesn't teach anything about it. He's just making an observation that it's occurring, but he doesn't teach anything about it. So he was well aware of it. He just didn't put it in this precept because he knew it wasn't causing harm. And this is how wise this individual was, that 2,500 years ago he understood this. There's people today that don't understand this particular thing, that same gender relationships, they're not causing any harm to anybody. So if you prefer same gender relationships, or you know somebody who does, it's completely normal. You're not causing any harm to anybody. But the thing is that people have craving, anger, and ignorance in their mind, and they have craving for everybody to have sex with the opposite gender. And when their craving is not being fulfilled, their anger is arising. And where that's coming from is their ignorance or their unknowing a true reality. But you can have wisdom and you can understand that there's no harm in same gender relationships. We can also understand transgender individuals through the teachings of the Buddha. That if you understand that the body is one thing and the mind is something completely different, that every single mind coming together with a body and the gender actually matching, that would be permanence. And that just doesn't exist. So if you have male sexual organs, but your mind is identifying as a female, that is completely normal. Where some people, yes, the body and the mind is of the same gender, but in some individuals, the body is of one gender and the mind is of another gender. And this is completely normal. This is the universal truth of impermanence. And if we understand the cycle of rebirth, that we've all been different genders at different times in the past, then it makes sense that this individual was maybe a female lizard, a female snake, maybe a female bear, maybe a female as a human. And now maybe in their next life, that mind ended up in a body that had male sexual organs. And now that individual identifies as a female. So we can understand that the things that we experience in life, such as transgender individuals, through the cycle of rebirth, the universal truth of impermanence. Because remember, the teachings of the Buddha aren't giving you a bunch of rules or commandments. He's explaining to you the natural world around you. He's explaining to you what is happening so that way you can understand these kinds of things. So if somebody that you know is transgender or you are a transgender individual, it's completely normal. There's nothing wrong with this. It's completely normal. There's no harm there whatsoever. Sometimes students ask me about masturbation because they're often taught that masturbation is immoral and you should never masturbate and all these kinds of things. But it really depends on what you're actually doing with masturbation. So I'm going to help you understand this topic. So if an individual is masturbating and they're maybe they're listening to this talk and they're like, man, I've got like 5 boyfriends or 5 girlfriends or 10 boyfriends or 10 girlfriends. You know, the Buddha was actually pretty accurate. I should only have one. This is pretty wise. And now maybe I need to bring this down to 1 boyfriend or 1 girlfriend. Well, when they do that, they're probably going to have a really high sexual craving, and they're using maybe some masturbation to bring their sensual desire down, their craving for sex down. So maybe they use a little bit of masturbation to be able to get to 1 boyfriend or 1 girlfriend. And this would actually be a good use of something like masturbation. Or maybe somebody is having a craving to go rape somebody. And now instead they use some masturbation so that they don't have that craving, that urge. This was actually really helpful. This produced wholesome results because it's helping to bring their sensual desire down. But in other situations, someone could be addicted to this, and maybe that they're masturbating 10, 15, 20, 30 times a day, and now their sensual desire is increasing. So it's a matter of whether your sensual desire is decreasing or whether it's increasing, and that's where you can look at masturbation to see if it's something that's actually helpful and beneficial or if it's leading to harm. If you understand anything about dams, like when they build these multi-million-dollar structures in order to hold water back, when the water is rising up and it's putting more and more pressure on the dam, the way that they protect the dam is they open up the dam in order to let the water out, and that protects the multi-million-dollar structure. So when you're eliminating certain cravings, desires, attachments in your mind, you might notice this pressure building up in your mind, and sometimes you just need to release that pressure. And it's just like opening up the dam. So if you went like say a week without sexual contact and you did some masturbation, maybe that's what you need in order to get to 2 weeks now of not having sex. And now maybe after 2 weeks, you have some masturbation, and now you can go 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks without sex. And now you do some masturbation, maybe you go 4, 5, 6 months potentially without sex. Now maybe you have a little bit of masturbation. So in this respect, masturbation is actually helping you. So it's not any harm involved unless it's increasing your sensual desire. You can actually use it to decrease your sensual desire, and it can be helpful there. Sex with animals is one of those things that's black and white. Very few things you'll see in the teachings of the Buddha are black and white, but there's no way an animal can give us consent to have sex with it. So we know that if somebody did that, they would probably get injured. There would probably be diseases and illnesses and all these kinds of things. So that's one of those things that's black and white. We can also look at something like pornography, where if you've ever been indulgent in pornography, you kind of go down into this fantasy world that is really hard to come out of. And oftentimes when you do come out of it, even when you're with an actual real life partner, it's kind of hard to have fulfilling experiences after that. So if you're interested in having sex and having intimacy, which someone who's usually looking at pornography, that's what they're interested in. They have a craving for intimacy. It's better to go towards an actual real life partner rather than pornography, because once you get down into that, it's really hard to come out of it. If you currently have a pornography addiction, you can actually train your mind to let that go. You'll find more satisfying, fulfilling relationships, because coming out of that can be somewhat hard. And if you need to talk about that, there's actually meditations that you can do in order to train your mind to eliminate this overwhelming sexual craving in the mind. And usually students are asking for that help on a one-on-one basis. So you're always welcome to ask for that. Do you guys have any questions on this one?
Yeah. So you mentioned something that when someone is not having sex, that they might feel like irritated or frustrated. I just, I'm currently not having sex right now, and I don't feel that. So I'm not. Maybe I'm misinterpreting what you're saying there.
Not having sex, you mean in this exact moment or over a period of time?
Yeah, just like when I find that I don't feel frustrated or irritated.
Have you ever gone a period of time where you were like having sex with a partner regularly, and then you guys either broke up or you stopped having sex and you noticed agitation?
Yeah.
That's what I'm talking about.
Oh, so you're not talking about like in a healthy relationship when you're simply not engaging in that activity. That's fine.
Yeah, so by the time you get to the point where you have trained your mind to get to enlightenment, you won't have any sexual craving in your mind at all. You will go 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, and you don't have any interest in sex whatsoever. Oftentimes in places like America, we kind of value our relationship based on sex, or we think that it's healthy to have sex, which I'm not necessarily disputing that, but what I'm sharing is that the mind will get attached to that because it's conditional pleasant feelings that now that when you're having sex, you'll feel all these pleasant feelings, this happiness, excitement, elation. But then when you're choosing not to have sex, like maybe you go a few weeks or a few months without sex, your mind can be frustrated, agitated, or annoyed. But these sexual cravings, they can go dormant for a period of time. You could go 6 months, a year, 2 years even without having sex. And maybe you're quite content without having sex, but then that craving can arise again where now you really want to have sex again. So as long as there's a craving for sex in the mind, you're not going to be able to get to permanent peace and permanent joy. So it's ultimately when you extinguish that particular central desire in the others that the mind can then experience permanent peace and permanent joy. Because as long as there's any kind of craving for sex, you're going to be agitated and frustrated at some point because your mind's going to want it and you can't get it. And now you're going to be frustrated or agitated or annoyed. Or even when you are getting it, the mind gets so happy and so excited, but it's only a temporary feeling that is ultimately going to fade away. Okay, so now let's go to the next one. This next one's really straightforward. The Buddha says, abandoning false speech, refraining from false speech, a true speaker, one to be relied on, trustworthy, dependable, not a deceiver of the world, So what he's teaching here is that it's unwise to lie and have a deliberate lie. And for those of us that have done that, because we've all pretty much done that as we were growing up, you can see that it didn't produce wholesome results for us. Because remember, you're not interested in believing these things. What the Buddha is teaching you is how to eliminate craving, anger, and ignorance. All of his teachings are doing that. So when an individual is lying, there's a certain craving. There's something that you want. And if you tell the truth, you're not going to get it. So that means the mind lies in order to get what it wants. So in order to get to the point where you've eliminated your discontent feelings, you're going to need to eliminate all your cravings, desires, attachments. And lying is one of the things, the behaviors that we do when we have craving, desire, attachment in our mind. So the Buddha is explaining to you the reason why it's important is that we can be trustworthy, dependable, not a deceiver of the world. Because in a professional environment, say, for example, if we're lying, people are going to discover our lies. And then when a new project comes up or some professional opportunity comes up, they're going to overlook us because they can't trust us. We're not dependable. So if you would like to get to the point where your life is moving forward and you're progressing professionally, you would like to be able to always speak the truth. And if you've done a lot of lying at any time during your life, you can see that you had to sort out, who did I tell this to? Who did I tell that to? Who did I tell this to? Your mind was almost obsessively trying to figure this out. So how could you get to peace and joy all the time when your mind's obsessively trying to figure out who you said what to? So if you'd like to get to a point where your mind's completely calm and peaceful and you're not having craving, desire, attachment in the mind, you would like to speak the truth. But speaking the truth doesn't always mean you tell everything that you know. Sometimes people ask me, like, what would I do in World War II if somebody was running towards my house and they went inside my house and they were hiding and a Nazi soldier showed up and said, where is such and such? And they're hiding under your bed. Would you just say, oh, they're under my bed? Go ahead, you can murder them now, right? Like, no, you wouldn't do that. What you can do is you can redirect this person, right? Like, telling the truth doesn't mean you tell everything you know. Now, if you're in a court of law or something like this, it would make sense to tell the truth and tell everything you know. But in a situation like this, where there's like a soldier showing up to your door wanting to kill the person hiding under your bed, I would do something like, oh, are you looking for Barbara? Maybe she's under that bush over there. Or let's go look. Maybe she's over there in the woods. Let's go over there. I'll help you find her. Let's go look for her, right? So you just kind of redirect them in a different place. So you don't have to tell this person everything you know. That's not what it means to tell the truth. But instead, you would like to be honest and trustworthy and open. But I can ask a question. I can say, oh, you're looking for Barbara? Is she over there in that bush? Right? I haven't lied about anything. I've just asked a question here. The Buddha understood this so well. You can see this other teaching that I've included in here where he's actually teaching his son. Sometimes people think that he left his family and he never came back, but this individual Rahula is his son. He taught his son, and his son actually got to enlightenment during his lifetime. He was sharing with his son that you should not tell a lie even as a joke. If you can imagine this individual who is so wise, teaching all this wisdom, and maybe in a class like this, he's actually teaching the truth and he's helping you understand the natural laws, but on the side, he's like lying and telling jokes and stuff, you wouldn't know whether to trust that individual in their day-to-day life and when they're sharing the teachings. So the Buddha didn't even tell a lie as a joke. So you might decide that you would like to practice to this level because it actually takes a lot more wisdom to tell a joke that is not a lie, that is actually honest. And usually those jokes are funnier. So if you actually have to work at this and kind of come up with a joke that isn't a lie, initially you might have to put a little bit of work and effort into this, but over time, you'll see that it actually is easier and easier for you. Because sometimes when people are joking, they actually belittle other people and they talk down to other people. And this isn't something that you would be interested in. You don't need to degrade other people in order to tell a joke. You can tell jokes that are uplifting and bright and cheerful, but it just takes training of your mind to do this. And here you can see that the Buddha is talking about telling jokes. Sometimes you don't associate a Buddha as telling jokes, because sometimes you see these pictures and these statues where the Buddha is all solemn and serious and meditating, and you might think that's what it means to be enlightened, that there's this, you don't enjoy things and you're so solemn and serious all the time. But can you imagine getting to that mental state where you never have any fun? That's not what enlightenment is. Enlightenment, you're having fun, you're enjoying things, you're telling jokes, right? You can do those kinds of things. There's no harm in that. So a Buddha actually has a personality. They have a character. They're going to tell jokes. So I think it's really helpful to be able to think of a Buddha as a human being, just like you and I, that they tell jokes. If you think this person is always serious and solemn, that's probably the way that you would end up being. But understand that a Buddha tells jokes. They just tell the truth when they tell jokes. So you might decide to do that kind of thing too. So any questions on this one? Yes, ma'am.
What if somebody is asking you a question and you feel like the answer may hurt them, or you're not interested in indulging in the answer? Could you just say no comment?
Sure, you're not causing any harm there. One of the common ones that people ask me when I usually teach this is they say, what if my wife comes to me and says, "Hey, honey, how do I look?" Right? should I lie? What should I do? Should I tell the truth? Well, what I teach people in that situation is what your wife's really looking, or you don't have a wife, you have a husband. Maybe he'll come to you and say, "Hey, honey, how do I look?" I don't suggest you say something negative and degrading and disparaging. What that individual is usually looking for is they're looking for confidence, right? They obviously bought those clothes because they thought they looked nice, and now they're looking to go out on the town, and they're looking for confidence is what they're looking for. So no matter how you think this person looks, it would be unwise to say something negative or degrading. Instead, it's like, "Hey, honey, I think whatever you wear looks wonderful. Let's just go have a good time." Or, "You know what? I just enjoy spending time with you. Let's go have fun," right? You can say these kinds of things. Because by the time you get to enlightenment, you won't have these cravings and expectations. You won't think of anybody as looking ugly. I can see beauty in every single person. So in the unenlightened state, though, you might look at someone and be like, "Oh, they don't look so good," right? But you don't have to say that. You can say something else instead, like, "Hey, I just enjoy spending time with you. Let's go out and have fun."
Thank you, Teacher David.
Mhm. What's that? That's where you just walk. That's where you just walk away, right? It's remember rem, remember the 5 factors of well-spoken speech. Speak at the proper time. What you say is true, gentle, beneficial. Is it beneficial to tell your wife she doesn't look good? and then with a mind of loving kindness, right? So if they keep persisting, just walk away from them. That's where you can't be attached. You go outside to the restaurant, get your own food, make your own food. Okay, so now one more, and then I think pizza's here. I can smell it, right? All right, so one more. Refraining from strong drink and sloth-producing drugs, substances that cause heedlessness, the basis for heedlessness. What the Buddha is teaching you here is about taking substances that would promote heedlessness. Remember, you're investigating his teachings, you're examining his teachings. If you don't know what the word heedlessness means, you need to look it up. And that's what I had to do because I didn't know what the word heedlessness mean. I kind of thought I knew and I kind of had an indication of what it was, but you need to know the truth with 100% certainty. So if you look up this word, it means careless, thoughtless, inattentive, uncalm, unaware, unmindful. So if there's any substance that you can put into the body that's going to promote those things, it's taking you in the opposite direction of enlightenment. Because in order to get to enlightenment, you need to have awareness of mind. And if you're going to take a substance that's promoting the opposite of that, then you're not going to be able to train your mind to move towards this enlightened mental state. So the Buddha spoke and he taught in a way that was timeless because he could have never imagined all the different substances that we would have created. Like LSD, for example. This is a chemical based substance. He could have never imagined that that would have been created because he knew the world was going to change. He knew of impermanence. So he taught in a way that no matter what substances come about, that we could apply this particular teaching. So if there's any substance that promotes heedlessness, we can know that it's unwise to be able to eat, to be able to ingest that particular thing. So there's a few things here that I have. This isn't an exhaustive list, but we'll just talk about a few of them so you can see that it's not black and white, right? Something like marijuana. We know that this plant has medical benefits, but it can also be used for substances that cause heedlessness. It really depends on how you're using it. There's individuals that are like children that have 20 seizures a day and they put a little CBD oil on their tongue and they don't have another seizure for 6 months. So we know that this particular plant has medical benefits. But whether you're taking it for those purposes or not is only you to decide. Whereas if you're going for a high, you're usually looking for a high THC in the plant. But if you're looking for the medical benefits, you're usually looking for a high CBD. These are the two opposite sides of the plant. And usually people who are taking it for medical benefits are usually taking it as an oil or maybe an edible, where oftentimes people who are getting high, they're going to smoke it. And this is going to cause harm to the lungs. But you can also ingest it as an edible to get high as well. So you would like to be able to make sure that if you're going to take this substance, that you're not doing it for heedlessness, right? And if you're doing it for medical purposes, you need to make sure that you understand that stress and anxiety is not a medical thing. Stress and anxiety is caused by craving, desire, attachment. You're not going to be able to eliminate your stress and anxiety with marijuana. It's just not possible. As long as you have marijuana on board, maybe you're more relaxed, but as soon as that marijuana is gone, you're going to be stressed and having anxiety because you haven't eliminated the cravings, desires, attachments that are producing it. So you need to look at those kinds of things for yourself. We know that cigarettes don't have any medical benefit. This is why more and more people have gotten away from those things. But when people didn't understand that, when they lacked that wisdom, the craving was leading to these unwholesome results. You need to even look at prescription medications because sometimes you're prescribed medications that could be addictive. And what you would be wise to do is when you're prescribed a certain medication is research that before you put it into the body. And if it's pretty addictive, you might talk to your doctor and say, hey, is there another option here? And maybe there is, and your doctor can give you a different option. But if there isn't, and this is the only thing that's available, at least you have that wisdom entering into that situation. And now you know to try to get off of that as soon as possible so it doesn't stick around and you get addicted to it. So you're going to need to pay attention to your prescription medications. You might even look at your caffeine intake because caffeine is a stimulant. It is a drug. It takes you into this excited state. And then when you don't have it, you're going to drop off. By the time you get to enlightenment, you'll have sustainable energy all day long where you don't ebb and flow like that. You don't go up and down. But as long as you take caffeine, your mind's going to go up into this excited state for a period of time, and then you're going to drop off. You're never giving your mind the opportunity to build sustainable long-term energy. So if you get rid of caffeine for the first few weeks or even months, you might feel kind of dull and lethargic. You might feel a little bit lazy. You might feel like you don't have the energy that you once had. But once you get rid of it and your body and your mind has adjusted, you're going to have sustainable energy all day long. By the time you get to enlightenment, you don't get exhausted. You don't get tired. You get sleepy where you need to sleep, but there's no exhaustion or tiredness in the mind. And this comes through training of the mind because if you go out in the world with lots of cravings, desires, attachments, if things are going well for you that day where you're getting all your cravings fulfilled, you'll get to the end of your day and you'll be like, wow, this was a perfect day. That's because all your cravings were getting fulfilled. But if you come home and your cravings weren't getting fulfilled, you'll feel exhausted. You'll feel tired. You might feel like you have bricks on your shoulders or bricks on your ankles. So when you get rid of your cravings, it's like laying down the burden of having to go out into the world and chase after all these things. So caffeine is not going to allow you to build that natural, sustainable energy where you can have this energy all day long. It's going to still take your mind up and it go down. So when you get rid of this, you can get to the point where you have sustainable energy all day long. You need to even look at your sugar intake. As we learned as children, if you have too much sugar, it can put you in a sugar high. We typically learn that as adults and we don't normally ingest as much sugar, but you would like to be sure you pay attention to that as well. Then you might decide to look at psychedelic substances because some people will tell you that psychedelic substances are going to help you to be able to get to enlightenment. And this isn't actually true. Psychedelic substances do promote kind of this introspection and kind of looking inward. And if you're ever taking psychedelic substances, you can see that that's the case. But this is something that is induced by a substance rather than you creating this on your own. You're going to need to cultivate this ability to look inward on your own so that all throughout your day you can be introspective. So that there's any particular situation you're encountering, you can actually look inward and figure out how to actually solve this. Whereas if you're talking to your mom and you're having a difficult conversation, you can't be like, hey, mom, can you hold on? I need to go drop this LSD. I'll be right back. I need to talk to you, a little bit later. You can't do that, right? You're going to need to, in the moment, be able to be introspective. So if you don't allow your mind to develop that introspection, then you'll get to the point where you're reliant on this substance and your mind can only be introspective when you have this particular substance. But if you get rid of these things, then you can develop that inwardly where you can have that introspection. The way that I think about this is that if you were walking down the street and you were doing some window shopping and you saw this beautiful handbag inside the store, you might see that handbag and you might see and think like, wow, I'd really like to go in there and touch it and feel it and maybe purchase it. But you're actually chained down to the street outside. You're chained down to the sidewalk. You can't go in and touch it. So these psychedelic substances can kind of mirror a little bit of what it's like to be introspective, but you can never get that thing permanently because you're chained down to the sidewalk and you haven't let it go yet. So let me know what questions you guys have here. Looks like Sweta has a question. I think your mic's not on.
So if there is anything that causes dependency, that's
Yeah, that would be a craving, desire, attachment. If you're dependent on something, so like Vibha being dependent on you for food, that's an attachment. He needs to learn to get his own food sometimes, right? Where he's
So-
not just attached to your food.
so it's okay to eat as long as you're not dependent on it for your function.
Yes, yes. But not all substances are
I
that
can
way,
decide.
right? Like you wouldn't say that with like cocaine or heroin, right? These are illicit drugs. You can't say, well, I can ingest some cocaine as long as I'm not addicted to it. There's certain substances that you
yes.
need to just get rid of 100%. But sugar is one of those things that you can ingest some sugar without having a sugar high and without being dependent on it.
Okay, thank you.
I just had a question. I think it's been asked in one of your classes before, but I just want to kind of get an opinion again. Like people talk about like microdosing,
Mhm.
right? They say, okay, only a very little bit of CBD or other things or psychedelic mushrooms. Is it good or not? So I just want to get your opinion on that.
Yeah. So again, this is the mind relying on a substance to be able to produce some type of result in the mind. And you would like to be able to cultivate that naturally so that you can have these qualities permanently. These are all conditional experiences that based on this condition, I will now experience this thing. And as long as your mind's doing that, it's not actually enlightened. By the time you get to enlightenment, you're having unconditioned mental qualities where your mind is just always experiencing the peace and the calm, the serenity and contentedness with joy. And as long as you're dependent on a substance for any particular experience, then you're not able to get to that permanent mental state.
Okay, one more question on this is medicines contain alcohol as well. A lot of medications have alcohol in it. So is it wise to take those medications?
So that's where you have to look at it, right? You have to look and decide, is there some other option that I could take that potentially doesn't have that? And if so, then maybe I'll take that. But if you're in a situation where there's just no other way for you to do it, now your intention behind it is to heal and to help, and you're taking it for that purpose. You're not taking it for heedlessness. So, like, for example, if I was to take a cough syrup, I would look for one that doesn't have alcohol in it. Or, like, even we have mouthwash at our house. We use mouthwash that doesn't have alcohol in it because some mouthwashes have alcohol in it. So you would like to look at those kinds of things and eliminate those things from your practice. And now there's enough awareness of these things that more and more companies are producing things without those kinds of things.
Okay, and what about like foods which have been like made in alcohol, but the alcohol actually evaporates while making the food? So like things cooked in wine and stuff.
Yeah, I still wouldn't ingest that kind of thing, but whether you do or not, it's up to you. But I wouldn't involve myself in ingesting anything that has any kind of alcohol in it whatsoever. I haven't seen anything that would require me to do that.
Thank you.
Mhm. Okay, so great discussion, great conversation. It's time for lunch. Let me see what time it is. I think we've got our pizza here. So it's 1:30. So if we can get back together at 2:30, that'll allow us to learn walking meditation. Actually, you know what? Let's go a little bit longer. Let's go to 2:45. Give us about an hour and 15 minutes for lunch. Apologize for those of you guys online. We have pizza here if you'd like to come eat some pizza wherever you are. But let's get back together at 2:45. That way it gives you an hour and 15 minutes because I can teach you walking meditation in that time. So thank you all for your discussion. Thank you for your questions. And I'll see you perhaps after lunch, okay? Or even during lunch.